may be sick with mental illness, but he is definitely not weak. This is Tyson Williams.
Well, thank you. How's everyone doing today? Happy to be out of class?
Yeah.
All right, I'll try to take up as much time as I possibly can. So like Lori said, I'm here to talk to you guys today about depression, about mental illness. When I talk about depression, I'm not talking about the emotion. There's a difference between being depressed, feeling depressed, and having depression. Try to imagine yourself just walking through the hallways of the school here, and you see someone walking up towards you, and you know, they got kind of a bounce in their step. They're smiling, they're laughing, they're telling jokes. You know, your first thought about that person when you see them is probably going to be, what? You know, they're in a good mood, right? So then you turn the corner and you see another person walking. And maybe this person, you know, got their hands in their pocket, their head down, kind of slouching. Now this could be tricky because this can either be a person who's in a bad mood or a Montreal Canadiens fan. So with me, I was the first person. You know, I was the guy walking through school, always had a smile on my face, always joking around, always laughing, and yet never feeling like I belonged. I had a great group of friends. I played a lot of sports, and no matter where I was, I didn't feel like I fit in there. So if I was with this group of friends, you know, as good of a time as we seemed to be having, I always wanted to be with this group of friends. And when I was with this group of friends, you know, I wanted to be home. I kind of wanted to be, wherever I was, I wanted to be someplace else, because I just never felt like I fit in, never felt like I belonged. And when I talk about my depression, I'm going to make it sound like, you know, there was an actual voice in my head. But when I describe it like that, it's my brain. Okay, my brain was talking to me. My brain was telling me things, telling me I wasn't good enough. You know, telling me I wasn't smart enough. And no matter what I tried to do to erase those thoughts, they never really went away. For me, hockey was my safe place. That was the one place I could go where it didn't seem to bother me. Being on the ice, being with my team, you know, I never initially, that voice, that my brain wouldn't attack me there. And I mean, it was great. It was great feeling part of, like, you know, part of the team. When I was about, I want to say 14, 15 years old, so the same age as probably a lot of you are here, that's when it's almost like it realized hockey was my safe place. It realized that's where I loved being the most, that's what I love doing the most, so that's where it's going to attack me too. So I could be on the ice, I could be in the middle of a game, I could have an open net, and I can remember purposely missing the net because I didn't want people coming up and high-fiving me and giving me a hug and all that stuff. I would have dizzy spells on the ice, completely out of nowhere. The rink would just start spinning and my legs would give out. Of course, everyone would laugh, and I would make it seem like, you know, I twisted a knee or I twisted my ankle or something. I wouldn't tell anybody that I really had no idea why these dizzy spells were happening. And eventually, what did end up happening is I quit hockey, making people believe, which was a surprise to a lot of people, that, you know, I told them that I just didn't feel like playing anymore. I wasn't going anywhere with it, and I just wanted to quit. No one questioned me on it. Like I said, a few people were surprised, but no one really questioned why, what brought it on, or the dizzy spells. You know, I never talked about those. Like I said, I would tell people that I twisted my knee, and when you're playing house league hockey, you know, it's not like, obviously not like the NHL, where if someone says they got hurt, you can go back and look at the tapes of the game and see the exact moment they got hurt. You know, no one was videotaping our games, for good reason. We weren't very good. But, so if I said I twisted a knee or twisted an ankle, people just believed it. As time went on with school, that brain of mine would keep telling me, you know, you're not smart enough, why try? So I'd have a big test coming up, I'd open a book, try to study, and you know, that voice, that my brain just kept saying, why are you wasting your time? I would look around my class, I would see my classmates, you know, they're getting results back, you know, scoring high, and I was always just scraping by. Into high school, you know, we never had a real, like, popular set of crowd or unpopular set of crowd. But no matter where I was in that crowd, I just kept feeling like I don't belong here. I don't fit in with these people. You know, seeing classmates look at and plan for their lives after high school, with graduation, college, careers in mind, stuff like that. I had some of those plans. I had some of those dreams, some of those goals. And my depression took that away from me. And again, throughout all this time, not once did I ever go to a parent, a friend, or a teacher and tell them what was going on in my head. And my reason for never telling anybody about it was because I truly believed no one is going to understand it. You know, I'd never heard of it talked about before. I'd never seen articles or anything on TV about mental illness, about depression before, so I really kind of thought this is just the crappy cards I got handed for my life, and learned to live with it. And learn to live with it I did. Initially, you know, when I talk about my brain talking to me and saying, you know, how I'm no good and worthless and all this stuff, they were what I call fleeting thoughts. So it wasn't a constant 24/7 in my head. It was, you know, initially maybe 20 to 30 second thought in my head that whatever I was about to do, whether that was do an oral report in school, write a test, my driver's test, you know, whatever it was almost like right before that, that's when these little fleeting thoughts would start popping up, and that's when I would give up. You know, I wouldn't even try. Somehow I faked my way through high school. I did pass, wasn't by very much, but I did graduate. And with depression, one term we like to use is wearing a mask. And that's how I was getting through all of this. When I first started talking about seeing that person in the hallway, you know, with that kind of bounce in their step, laughing, making jokes, all that kind of stuff, which was me. That was me wearing that mask. because in front of other people, I loved being the clown. I loved making people smile. I loved making people laugh. And if that meant making fun of myself to do it, that's what I would do. But when I'd get into a room by myself, that's when I was able to take that mask off. And really feel nothing. And I don't know how else to describe that. If you, if you try to think of the best moment in your life up until now, whatever that may be, whether it was you won the big game or scored the big goal or passed the test or whatever, just think of your happiest, greatest moment in your life up until now, and now try to imagine yourself going through that moment without being able to feel it. Or on the flip side of that, going through the worst moment of your life, and maybe you lost a big game, or maybe you found out the girl you like doesn't like you back, or on a bigger note, maybe someone you loved passed away. Now try to imagine going through something like that again without actually feeling it. I can remember, I believe I was 14, 15 years old when I lost my grandpa, who I was very close with, and literally trying to make myself cry at his funeral, and I couldn't. So that mask is what I wore for the majority of my life. I always say when it comes to depression, I'm one of the fortunate ones, because I think it attacks different people in different ways. With me, it took a lot of years before it hit that boiling point. But in those years, wearing that mask every day, it still takes a toll on a person. And I still, even after high school, in my early 20s, going from job to job, city to city, I still had never told a soul what was going on in my head. And the reason was just like before. I'd never heard it or seen it talked about before. I'd never seen anything on TV, so I was scared. I was scared to go up to somebody, tell them what I was going through, and what would they think of me, right? They're going to think I'm a wimp, they're going to think I'm weak. As a guy, we're taught not to cry. We're taught not to talk about our feelings. And whether that's, not necessarily meaning you're taught that at home, but on TV, we're taught that we shouldn't talk about this stuff. And if we do, we're weak. And as a guy, the last thing I wanted to be known as was weak. So my life went on. I grew up in Prince Albert, born and raised. And at 20 years old, or 21 years old, I thought maybe it was the city. Maybe I needed to get out of the city. Have any of you ever been to PA? Yeah, so you want to get out of it. So I pretty much, it was almost like putting my finger on a map to decide where I'm going to go next. And no reason whatsoever, but my finger landed on North Battleford. Has there a lot of you been to North Battleford? So it's just a smaller version of PA. So I got to North Battleford, and my depression, my brain kind of relaxed on me for a little bit. I enrolled in the college there, and I actually did really well taking the course I took. I ended up getting a job that I still have to this day, and in a mental facility of all places. And I met a girl and ended up getting married, and we had a daughter, and the daughter some of you know from what I'm told. And so for a little while there, that depression eased up on me. So when it did ease up on me and when things were going good, I thought, you know, okay, well, there's no point talking about the past to anybody because I'm doing better now, right? So, and besides, what good is it going to do? Well, it's like when you get sick, whether it's a cold or infection or something, and you go to the doctor, he gives you a prescription, and you take that prescription, and let's say you're supposed to take it for 10 days, but after 4 days you're feeling better, so you stop taking it. And what's likely going to happen to you? You're going to get sick again. And that's exactly what happened to me, is I got sick again. My depression came back, and it came back even stronger this time. So being married with a daughter, you know, that's what it attacked for me. I found for my depression, it attacks basically what I love the most in life. So with my daughter, I mean, she's my pride and joy. I loved her to bits. But there was this constant voice that in my brain constantly telling me she deserves better. She deserves a better dad. Her mom deserves a better husband. And no matter how much I would try to erase that thought and really kind of go all into being a dad and being the best dad I could and everything else, that voice was always there. You know, every once in a while. I mean, at this point it was still what I call those fleeting thoughts. So, you know, it'd pop in my head for 30 seconds to maybe a minute now. You know, and tell me what a horrible father I was. How she deserves such, you know, a better dad. Her mom deserves such a better husband. And again, I just quit trying. And again, at no point in any of this did I ever tell a soul what was going on up here. Needless to say, the marriage ended. They moved to Saskatoon, so I went from being an everyday dad to an every 2 weeks dad, where I'd go and get her every second weekend and bring her back to my place. Being a single dad, I lived what I call paycheck to about 3 or 4 days before my following payday. So I didn't always have a lot of money. So I'd go get my daughter and bring her back on the weekends, and sometimes all I had was the gas money to go get her and then to bring her back at the end of the weekend. So not really a lot of money floating that I could take her out for supper or buy her stuff or whatever. And you know, that's another area where my depression would attack me, right? Finances. You know, how can you be a good dad when you can't even afford to take her to McDonald's? And again, fleeting thoughts. You know, that mask I talked about earlier, I'd put that mask on for the weekend and I'd be the best dad I could be. I'd be fun. I mean, we were having ice cream for supper, and when I'd bring her home at the end of the weekend, and her mom would ask if she had anything decent to eat, like, did you give her vegetables or something? And I'd always say, well, I made her a nice bowl of ice cream, and I always used to put a cucumber on top of it. So to me, that was a good, healthy meal. But for that weekend I'd have my daughter, I'd wear that mask. And the second I dropped her off and drove away, that mask would come off. And it was the same way, and the same way through my life, like through work. You know, I would go to work. I was known as the funny, easygoing guy, always joking around, making people laugh, making patients laugh. And yet, going home at the end of a shift, and I'd be back to that feeling nothing. And that was my life for a few years. And again, you know, when I talk about just taking a prescription that the doctor gives you, you know, for a few days when you're supposed to take it for a couple weeks, and what happens is you get sicker. And that's what happened with me, is I got sicker again. And this time I got really sick. This time, those fleeting thoughts that would pop in my head every 30, you know, for 30 seconds to a minute or whatever, they weren't fleeting anymore. They were 24/7. It was like having a radio in between my ears, turned up high for 24 hours, 7 days a week. The only sleep I was getting was when my body became basically so exhausted that it had no choice but to shut down. You know, and I was still only maybe sleeping for an hour or two a night. That mask was getting to be harder to wear as often as I was, because like I said, I would wear it at work. I was playing ball, and you know, so I'd wear it to ball. We'd go out, you know, and have some appetizers or whatever after a game. So basically, anytime I went out in public, I'd wear that mask. You know, anytime I had my daughter for a weekend, I'd wear that mask. And it got harder and harder to keep that mask on. And I don't know at that, or I didn't know at that time, if anyone noticed any changes in me. Going back now, there have been a few people that have said, yeah, I noticed some. But no one ever said anything to me. No one asked me how I was doing. And I certainly still had never told a soul what was happening with me. And all that came to a decision I had made about 10 years ago now. And I had made the decision that about a week, how do I put this? I had made a decision, I had picked a day where I wasn't going to deal with this anymore. I couldn't deal with it anymore. I was in so much pain. And when I say pain, I mean physical pain as well. I mean, my body ached from head to toe. My body aches from head to toe now, but that's just because I'm really out of shape. But at this point in time, my brain was going 24/7, and how I describe it is, you know, if you're in the car, you know, your song comes on, you crank it up, you get to wherever you're going, and you get out of the car, you forget to turn the volume back down before you get out. And when you start that car up, that radio, stereo is screaming at you. That's what was going on up here. That was my depression. And I was living with that, like I said, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I didn't know how to shut it off. And at that point, still, I had never heard anybody talk about it. I'd never seen it, anything about it on TV or in magazines. I'm a guy, so I can't go to tell anybody, you know, talk about my feelings. I can't cry. So I made a decision that on this particular day, I was going to give up fighting. And I got things in order. I wrote some letters. And they were the hardest letters I've had to write. And these weren't letters, and this wasn't a thought process of thinking or believing that my family doesn't love me or doesn't care about me, that my friends don't love me or care about me. This was a feeling of, I know they cared about me, I know they loved me. But my depression had me believing that I was such a burden, such a stress on their life, that they deserved so much better, and it would just be a lot better for everybody if I left. And I made that decision, and that day came, and I wasn't sure what to expect. I was scared because of that. I didn't know what to expect. I didn't know when I was supposed to carry out this plan. I just expected some switch to go off in my head that said, okay, Tyson, go do it, now's the time. So I spent that day just waiting for this switch to go off. And kind of relieved, you could say, which I think is a scary part when you're at that point, when you get to that point of being relieved. Because that fear I had was kind of going down a bit, and I was relieved that I wasn't going to feel this pain anymore. You know, I knew my family would be sad, I knew my daughter would be sad, but my depression also had me believing that they'll get over it. So during that day, as I'm waiting for this, like I said, this switch to go off, I happened to be watching TV. Now, judging by most of your ages, I'm going to assume there's not many of you that know who a guy named Michael Landsberg is. Some of the older ones might, but you all know the TV station TSN, right? You know that one? Okay, so Michael Landsberg used to host a show on TSN called Off the Record. And it was a show where athletes, celebrities would be his guests and they'd talk sports. And on this particular day, whether it be fate or whatever you call it, that switch hadn't gone off for me yet. And Michael's show came on. And on that show, he had a guest named Stéphane Richer. Have any of you heard of him? I forget how old I am sometimes.
Not that old,
Stéphane Richer played in the NHL, won a couple of cups, one of them with Montreal. I almost turned the TV off because he played with Montreal. He was the last Montreal Canadian to score 50 goals in a year. And like I said, he won 2 cups, one with Montreal, the second with New Jersey. And that was Michael's guest that day on the show. And wouldn't you know, they both battled depression. And they talked about it. And it was the first time in my life that I had seen 2 people sitting there talking about depression and talking about their experience with it And as they're talking about it, I'm in disbelief. I'm almost kind of want to laugh at that point, that I'm at the point where I'm ready to give up my fight, and these two guys come on the TV. It's like they're both reaching through the screen, slapping me across the face. And I'm watching this, and at this point I'm bawling, because everything they're talking about is pretty much exactly what I've been dealing with most of my life. And when you think about it, where Richer is concerned, I mean, Stéphane Richer lived my dream, minus playing for Montreal. But here's a guy who not only made it to the NHL, but became a superstar in the NHL. And he got to actually win a Stanley Cup. And he's telling a story about right after winning his second cup with New Jersey, and he's driving back from Montreal, and all he can think about is hitting the gas pedal and running his car into a tree. And you think, how is that possible? Here's this guy who's got everything you think you'd want in life. I know I wanted. And he'd want to do that to himself. And how is it possible that I'm sitting here in North Battleford, Saskatchewan, watching him talk about it, and I can relate to everything he's talking about, to how he's feeling, you know, what his thoughts are. So at the end of that show, Michael's email address popped up on the bottom of the screen. And I was never big on writing to celebrity figures or anything like that, but I just thought he should know that doing that show is going to save someone's life. And that's what I put in the email, and I thanked him. I also put in the email it was too late for me, because I still had that plan in my head, and my depression was still telling me that I'd made the right decision. But I needed, or I felt I needed to tell Michael in this email that by doing that show, someone's life was probably going to be saved. Now, I didn't know the whole process of writing a public figure or anything like that, so I figured he's never going to see this email. And I figured if he does, it's going to be 6 months down the road, and some assistant lackey of his is just going to reply with, "Hey, thanks for watching OTR." But my computer would set off a little ding whenever I got an email. And after I'd sent that email to him, I would say within 10 minutes, that first ding went off. And it was him. And we started sending some messages back and forth. And I told him what I was going through, what I had been through. The only thing I hadn't told him was what my plan was for that day. And so as we talked, he asked me really a simple question. And it's a question that nobody had ever asked me, and nobody had ever asked me because I had never told anybody. And he said, "Well, if you've never gone to go get help, why not go today? What do you got to lose?" Something as simple as that clicked up here. And I thought, geez, that kind of makes sense. But then depression would come back and it would say, no, you don't listen to this guy. You know, you have your plan, you wrote all your letters, you finished that. Don't worry about him. So me and Michael talked for probably a couple of hours that afternoon. Not once did I tell him what my plan was for that day, but every message he was sending me started making a little bit more sense, and a little bit more sense. And like I said, it was something simple, like, what have I got to lose? About halfway through that conversation, I would get up and walk to my room because that switch was starting to go off. And every time I'd get up and start walking, that ding on my computer would go off, and it was him again. And one thing about Michael is he loves to talk, which made him a good host for a talk show. And at one point, I turned back to this computer, and all I can think is, this guy doesn't shut up even in email. But I'm grateful that that conversation took place, because I'm here today because of that conversation. And there's a lot of great things that have happened since that conversation. And there are some not so great things that happened too. I still battle with depression. I still have my rough days. However, when I look at my rough days today, my roughest days today would have been by leaps and bounds my best days back then. And I didn't get better overnight. You know, after that conversation I had with him, I laid down and I cried. And I cried harder than I'd probably ever cried in my life, because I knew deep down I didn't want to die. Next thing I know, I wake up and it's the next day. And my first thought was, I made it. I talked about it to somebody, even though it was somebody I didn't know, and it was somebody I would most likely never meet. And I made it through that day. And I actually did feel a little bit better. So I coasted on that for maybe a couple weeks. And again, going back to the whole doctor medicine thing, you know, I wasn't taking my medicine, so I got sicker again. And this time I got sicker than I'd ever been in my life. And this time, rather than give up, I still had a little bit of fight in me, and I made a phone call. Now, in making that phone call, that wasn't a tough thing, or that wasn't an easy thing, because well, I don't know how familiar you kids are nowadays with phone books. But phone books used to have emergency numbers on the inside covers. And so this is about 2 o'clock in the morning, and I had to make a phone call. If I didn't make a phone call, I knew that was the end for me. I knew I had to get somebody there to help me. Again, from 2 weeks before, I talked about it and I felt better. So in my head, as much as my depression was screaming at me to just get it over with already, I now had another part of my brain that's screaming at me that's saying, make that call. And as I'm looking in the emergency numbers, and I'm looking for a suicide hotline, there wasn't one. The one thing I did find was a 24-hour sexual assault hotline. So in my head, I figured, okay, well, the sexual assault people are probably friends with the suicide people, so I'm sure they have a number. So I called this number, and before I'd made this call, I'm a blubbering mess at this point. I'm bawling my head off, I'm scared, I want this pain to end, I don't know how to end it, I don't want to die, but I know I will. So I made this call, and a lady answers. And even in this state of mind, this lady, this complete stranger, answers this phone. And I do my sniffles and try to get my best business voice up. And I ask her nice and calm, would you happen to have the number to a suicide hotline? And then there's this little bit of silence. And then she asks me a simple question that I had never been asked before, and I had never been asked before, again, because I never talked about it to anybody. And she simply asked, are you okay? And that was enough to send me back to being that blubbery mess. But I knew it was a call I had to make. I knew I needed help, and I knew I didn't want to die. That night or early morning ended with 4 RCMP at my door. And surprisingly, it wasn't like you sometimes see on TV. They didn't bust my door down. They didn't yell and scream at me. They sat me down and talked to me. They asked me what was going on. I told them. I ended up spending the next week on the mental health ward of the hospital in North Battleford. And it was probably, again, in a matter of speaking, I guess, one of the best weeks, the eye-opening weeks of my life. Because I met a guy in there, and he wasn't a staff, he was a fellow patient. And this guy, I've yet to see another guy come close to matching his manliness. I mean, when you think of a man, that's this, he was a mountain. His hands were bigger than my head. And we were outside having a smoke, and he looked at me and he said, so what are you in for? And I told him, because I figured at this point, who cares? And this guy that I looked at, this huge mountain of a man, believe it or not, was in there for the same reason I was. So one thing that taught me is depression can affect anybody. It doesn't care how manly you are. It doesn't care how old you are. It doesn't care how young you are, what color your skin is. Anyone can get it. And it's what we do when we notice something's going wrong. That's the key in all this. Never be afraid to talk about it. Talking is suicide's worst enemy. You know, it shouldn't be that secret, that little taboo subject. If you're feeling like I described in my story, it's okay to talk about it. Whether it be to a friend, to a teacher, parent, stranger, like I did. And you'll find it's worth it. Stats tell us that in this country, 1 in 5 people will either have or struggle with a mental health issue. So when I look around this room, I see more than 5 people. So by being up here today, and I don't like being up here today, trust me, Lori talked to me, and this isn't one of my favorite things to do. But what I want you people to see is someone who can stand up here and not whisper or not act like it's something I should be ashamed about. I have depression. I've battled it. And I'm here today because I talked about it. I reached out and someone reached back. And I will guarantee if you reach out, someone will reach back. This fight that we deal with, this fight that we fight on a daily basis, is worth it. I'm worth it, you're all worth it. And I've now got a new wife at home and another daughter, and she is here because I reached out. I used to tell people I spent most of my life being rejected by women. Now I'm surrounded by them. So that's my message today. Reach out, talk about it. Don't be ashamed. I'm not. As the shirt says, I may be sick, but I can guarantee you I'm not weak. Sorry, I didn't catch all of that.
What would you say to a person that went to illness?
So if someone came to me and said, you know, I might have depression, that kind of thing, is that what you mean? I would say, if they came up to me and said it, I'd say, guess what, so do I. And talk to them about it. You know, ask them what they're going through, what they're thinking. One thing I don't do is I came across or talked to a person one time who was telling me about a situation they had when they were talking to a friend, and the friend had asked them to promise that whatever they said they wouldn't tell anybody. That's one thing I won't do, and if that means pissing off a friend because of it, so be it. I'd rather have a pissed off friend who's sitting in this room than a friend who's not here, right? Did that answer it? Okay.
I didn't get a chance to put it up on the board. We were running a little bit late, but at the back of the room, there's also a sheet of resources. It's, are you looking for help? And it's got immediate need and crisis, and it's got some phone numbers, and then it's got an ongoing conversation part where we've got a list of different facilities. Some are Saskatchewan, and then the sick-not-weak community, which Tyson belongs to and is a huge advocate for. Their mission in life is to go around and tell you people, tell all of us that there's hope.
If someone you said don't promise, but can you promise that you won't tell any of their friends or someone they don't trust, and you just tell their parents, or like?
Oh, for sure. Yeah, like you don't want to, you know, you don't want to go around and start putting up texts or Snapchats to everyone at school about what this person's telling you. But I mean, if you think, I guess the way I see it, if someone is talking to you about what they're going through and you think they might hurt themselves because of it, then I think it's really important that you go tell their parents or a teacher or someone. Yeah, you don't, you know, you wouldn't have to, you could promise them that you won't tell your classmates, kind of thing.
I want to thank you for coming up and talking. That means a lot. At what point did you go on medication?
I'm not on medication.
No? Were you
I'm, like I say this a lot when it comes to depression, where I consider myself one of the fortunate ones. I am in therapy. I have been for years. And so far for me, that's what's worked. Talking about it for me is my medicine, so to speak. Now, I'm not against medication by any means. I don't talk a lot about it because I don't know that much about it. But, I mean, if it came down to it, if I were to have a relapse, let's say, and the doctor said, this is what I want you to try, I mean, I'm all for it.
Sorry to make the assumption.
No, it's all good.
Wondering with the hospital.
It's all good.